use the jargon without realizing that you do, because you're so used to using those terms. And I'm thinking, it would be nice to be able to pair up with people who are in movements and who can tell you, well, you know, that is given in a way that nobody will understand. So rewriting. So I think working in partnership would be great, because I know that, you know, a lot of us are doing or have done militant research, but at some point you get incorporated into academia, and it's really hard then, you know, sort of talking in an accessible manner sometimes. And I find that it would be nice to be able to partner.
A buddy system.
To have a buddy system, yes. I mean, I know it sounds weird, but yeah.
So, yeah, people want to speak, put your hands up again, and I'll make sure I'm not missing anyone. So, you had your hand up. One, two, three, and then, like...
I completely agree with Anastasia's point that your, like, vocabulary and terms and, you know, limits come to be defined by the institutions you fall into a bit too easily. But from a lot of the research to answer your question, to move towards answering your question, a lot of the research that people have talked about in this circle now have emerged from active participation and problems that have emerged through practice and that are kind of encountered through practice and practice. But then emerge, you know, someone for one reason or another thinks it's so interesting they want to spend years of their life thinking about it. But clearly a lot of these projects kind of emerge from, and you hope that despite that aspect of capture, that they are spoken from movements, even if they don't speak for movements, and that can be useful. Because, you know, in these explosive moments like Occupy, which is really characterised for so many people by like a sense of novelty, and I think there's certain reasons for that which we could talk about. But later on, you had so many conversations, people were like, oh my god, if only I'd known this before, like these kind of like pitfalls and troubles. And I'm not suggesting, I mean, that there was work before that would be incredibly useful had everyone known it. But the question therefore becomes one about dissemination and access, like Mark was saying, how to make it accessible and useful to people. Yeah.
So there's two more. I'll take yourself first of all then.
Okay. So I'm quite nervous about the idea that knowledge has to be for something. I think that's quite an instrumental and reductionist way of thinking about what knowledge is for and what we can do with it. The knowledge we produce on Occupy isn't just actually about Occupy, it's about the self-understanding of a society for itself. Yeah, the way we understand each other and ourselves collectively and their history collectively. And I think, you know, in a way, you know, the women who recently occupied those flats in East London, they didn't need a fucking book on the internet to teach them what to do, they just went and did it. And then it's through that occupying those flats, it's through that process that they become, you know, the people that they are, you know, they need that experience of doing it, of going wrong, of making mistakes, of winning victories, etc. That's what's important, rather than having a template to, now that's day two now, this is what we do. You know, I don't think that's useful to anyone. The other point I wanted to make was, you precipitated quite a discussion about methodology, and that was a feature of, when I did my research with Occupy Hong Kong, all the sites were gone. And I really noticed the difference of you know, I was doing basically qualitative, exactly what you said you shouldn't do, I was doing, which is semi-structured interviews with people in, as it were, sterile settings, such as, you know, noodle bars or something like that, or a coffee bar, or you know, somebody's office or something like that. And you know, I reflected on that at the time, you know, not just today that I thought about it, but it was so different to what happened to the conversations I was having with people around St Paul's. I just thought it was worth raising here, that sometimes you have to work in the situation you're in, you know, and you have to adapt your methods to changing circumstances. But that doesn't, as long as you're aware, I think, then that's okay, as long as you're reflective about what you're doing and how you do it.
Right, so yeah, and then we'll come.
This question of jargon, I mean, you seem to be suggesting, Mr. Buddy, that we had a translator to translate the jargon into everyday English. I mean, I have trouble with that because I've written this, and it's very difficult to get away from jargon because it sums up lots of words in one or two words. I mean, you're talking about things which are more specific than most people talk about, so there aren't really words to describe them. So I'll put this on here. Whether it can be translated into
Speak
everyday
up,
language,
please.
whether it can be translated into everyday language, I don't really know. But what you're suggesting here is that we get somebody in everyday society to attempt to do that. Yeah.
Well, sometimes I think we need help to do that. That's what I mean. I think we need people to help us. I mean, I think that, for example, if you were going to teach that to students, you would have to simplify it a lot.
Yeah.
So, and you learn this better yourself, I think, as well.
Yeah.
So you learn by teaching. And I think that, you know, when you try to make something more understandable to people, sometimes you need help, you know, to do that.
Yeah.
And it's fine.
Yeah, I mean, I did this in the pub the other week.
Sorry. So there were 2 other hands already up, so,
Yeah, okay, we'll come back to it, yeah.
but
Yeah.
don't want to cut that thread at all, just in the mind that people who also haven't spoken. And is there anyone else that wanted to speak? Yeah, okay, so we'll go, I think the order I saw was Kate first, and yourself, and then... Oh, you wait, okay. So do you want to go and then, yeah.
Yes, yes. But I think,
Can't wave in.
as I spoke and turned up and did my stuff at St Paul, I really thought for a moment you were immensely useful, or we were immensely useful, because we began to look like a countervailing force to the City of London. We began to look as if there was an intelligent way of talking about the power of the City of London and how it was misused solely for the purposes of the City of London. And that was very special and very important. So it was an achievement, but it just disappeared. And it's a great pity it just disappeared, because I think it's something that was recognised far more widely than maybe you or we understood. I think it was very respected for what it was trying to say and what it was, and the way it occupied space to make the point. When you shook up the Bishop of London, I can't tell you how that was. I'm a clergyman, for those who don't know, so I'm just delighted the Dean went, and very sorry that they lost Fraser. But anyway, that's my feeling about how useful this movement is, and I think it's very, very important. Sorry.
Thank you. So, Vika, had the hand up next.
I have 3 things to say. I'll try and be short. First, I think, like most of you, interviewed me. And I just wanted to say that, like, for me, that moment of the interview was a really rich moment also for me, because, like, it's so hard to, like, stop and reflect on things. Like, when you had questions asked about, like, your involvement and so on, it was really a moment of reflection that I often felt I needed when I didn't find the space. So on a personal level, I found it very useful. I wanted to refer to an event that I went to in Marseille that for me was very interesting, in which it was basically a gathering of all the occupied factories in Europe, which are about 4. But at the same time, so there were the workers of these occupied factories, it was in an occupied factory, but also the researchers from Argentina had come over, who had been like researching the occupied factory in Argentina for 10 years. And then some just activists like me that were interested in the topic turned up. And in this gathering, there was like a really amazing energy of very, very high respect for the 3 sort of components of the group. A real sense of like, okay, all elements are important and we're showing solidarity between us. I think the researchers that were there were, first of all, activists. So basically they were like, how can we use academia to support the activists? And so they were shaping their whole research through that and sort of like providing them the information in a way that they thought would be useful for activists or workers and so on. So I think that for me is like one of the crucial things, like the information that you're gathering, and it depends very much from which sort of research faculty you're in, but how you then present it and what tools you provide activists with. So from like those researching social media, especially like in Spain, the way that they presented the information so that then activists can be like, okay, so you've mapped the way we communicate on social media, then next time we can use it this way. Or, I don't know, like how assemblies work, like if that can be provided in a way that then other activists can use it. Or mapping, so I think that's one of the things that like in Argentina they did was actually to have sort of a database of the occupied factories and information about these occupied factories and so on. So if like through academia you can access resources to set up these platforms, these are very, very useful things for them.
Awesome. So we're almost running out of time, and I know there's lots of different threads. So maybe if people, has anyone got any final thoughts or comments that they want to
Yeah, there is
raise?
something I really want to
okay,
say. So
yeah.
sort of in response to this notion that at one moment, let's say it was a moment, it was probably more than a moment, at St Paul's it felt as if something really extraordinary was happening, and then you commented that it all sort of fell away. I kind of think one of the things that's missing is the notion that Sam's touched on to do with imagination. In order to make this extraordinary thing happen, one has to be able to visualise the resolution of the problem and stick tenaciously to it through all the difficulties that will inevitably arise. And whilst I completely understand Paul's point about, you know, people discover it like the women in East London by doing it, yes, no two movements are the same. I've spent 5 years living in Greenham Common,